All right, so I was minding my own business, just quietly working from the beach the other day. Well, near the beach where we're staying in this Airbnb. And anyway, this happened. So how about that? Yeah. For those of you who don't know who Tim Ferriss is, he wrote the seminal book for digital entrepreneur types, The 4 Hour Work Week. So to get a mention from that guy just kind of randomly out of the blue, pretty crazy, kind of fun. A lot of people now connecting with me on LinkedIn of all things. So anyway, that was my week. Let's do a reader question roundup. How about that? I will go through and answer. I'm going to try to get through 3 or 4 of these. I'm going to kind of go through with minimal preparation here, reading the questions on screen as I go and then answering them, because that seems like a good, fun way to clear out the backlog of reader questions. So if you would like to hear me answer 3 or 4 reader questions, then let's do that. All right, let's read the first reader question. This is kind of a long one. I have been following almost every article you post on your blog. I really wish I had some more emotional strength in dealing with some obstinate clients that I have worked with in the past. You've inspired me to finally set up my own shop and work independently. Cool, glad to hear it. I have worked as an employee for many companies. It seems my time is more valuable and better utilized if I come in as a consulting coach as opposed to an employee coach, as I know there is a strong market and demand for this in India. So I think what this means is to coach software developers as a consultant rather than some large enterprises have employee coaches. So I'm assuming that's what we're talking about here. So he says, I would like to know some of the people challenges you faced while coaching independently. For instance, in one case, one of the clients I recently worked with, what could I have done differently in dealing with a manager who started counting my time spent on site and started managing me? Ouch. Okay, so there's kind of a couple things going on here. What are some of the people challenges I've faced while coaching or doing training, my consulting? I'm going to maybe skip that because I could probably do an entire series of videos on that. So I'd have to think that through and give you kind of a greatest hits. So let's talk about this idea of a manager who starts counting time spent on site and managing you. This is if you're brought in as an independent consultant. So let me start by saying what I, Eric Dietrich, would do in this situation. If I came into an organization to train some software developers and some line manager type showed up with a stopwatch and started trying to time my hours, I would probably go to the person that I was engaged with and ask that person to get this person to leave me alone. If this person actually had some authority to do this, what I would do is go to my buyer and say, I'm going to refund you all your money and I'm out of here. I'm not dealing with this.
Wash it yourself, man. I retire.
I will admit that is certainly, has some elements of privilege or what have you to it. But that is what I would personally do. And it's kind of what I would recommend, because there's an interesting thing going on here, which is if you're brought in, then in this situation, it's probably somebody above the manager in the organization that has brought you in to do this consulting, and you have stumbled your way into some kind of pissing match. This person is probably trying to stake out some territory, like, hey, big shot consultant, I'm in charge here. How many hours have you spent? And blah, blah, blah. So that's a toxic situation where you're not really set up for success. I wouldn't recommend continuing that. If you go to the person you're engaged with and you say, look, if I'm not going to operate this way, I can give you your money back and we'll just forget it. Almost certainly the director or VP or whoever it is going to tell that manager to go away and leave you alone. So that's the strategy I would recommend taking. The broader point here is that you want to kind of be sensitive to the optics of your engagement. Like, who are you engaged with? Who's your buyer? And what can they shield you from? What level of the organization are they in? What's your charter? And I will kind of close with one last bit of advice is if you come in with a very specific mandate to do this piece of training or this piece of coaching and then go, you're probably not going to be subject to stuff like that nearly as much as if you come in on an indefinite contract and you're going to be a coach forever, then you start to look like an employee. And I think that's the kind of thing that drives a line manager like this to start to posturing like this, because it's unclear where you fit in the pecking order, but you look like an employee. So this guy's going to assert some dominance here. So that's what I would do. I would go back to the person who you've engaged with and try to get that person to do something about it, or just, blast out of there and move on to the next thing. All right, next card up in my Trello backlog. I am interested in finding better ways to work. Okay, so yeah, that was the question, but it's because I wrote a blog post. And in that blog post, this was some years back, I alluded to my own folly when I first went off as a free agent in 2014, full-time free agent, where I kind of emailed everyone in my network saying, hey, I'm going to be out on my own freelancing, so why don't you, recommend me to anybody who could use the work? I'm going to do software developers, so give me a call. And so, in the post, I alluded to how this was folly. There are better ways to find work than this. And parenthetically, I said, weigh in the comments or what have you, if you're interested in hearing about that. Well, a bunch of people weighed in, and here I am 3 years later, finally answering you. Sorry about that, but I guess better late than never. So, if you're going off on your own freelancing, what's a better way to get work than bombing stuff out to your network and saying, hey, I'm free, give me work? So to speak to this in earnest, the problem with what you're asking here, if you're doing this, is that your network doesn't really know how to recommend. Like, yeah, everybody could use some software development work, but like, how is the average person, if you've got someone in your uncle who's an accountant, how is he going to know whether you're a fit for some organization or not? So that's the inherent problem here. This is a very low signal to noise ratio kind of thing you're doing, where you're saying, hey, everyone, I'm giving you all a homework assignment. Go out and find me some work. People aren't going to do that. People don't like homework. Whereas if you were to be able to go to your uncle and say, I specifically work with, startups that are looking to do the following things, and I looked in your network, on LinkedIn, and I see that you know these 3 people. I'd love an introduction to them. Believe it or not, even though that might sound a little invasive, people are much more likely to do that because it's easy. It's not, hey, you think about how you can go find me a job. It's, hey, can you do this very specific thing? Introduce me to these 3 people. People want to help you, so they will do stuff like that. So if you kind of work backwards from there, you'll notice that there needed to be a very specific kind of mapping of what you do to what people in the world understand. That means, and I harp on this on my blog all the time, but that means that you need a niche. You need something that you do that you can clearly explain in an elevator pitch that isn't general app dev. So when we're talking about the best ways to find work, kind of the prerequisite for all that is to have a niche, have a thing you do that you can explain, and you can explain it in such a way that your uncle, the accountant, understands it and can recommend you to other people. That's where you're going to have a lot of luck finding work, reaching out through and using your network. Now, I can recommend some other things too in terms of finding work. Creating and starting my blog and doing training courses for Pluralsight stacked my pipeline with an awful lot of work. So this is inbound leads. People are saying, hey, I see you blog about static analysis. Can you help me out? So getting yourself out there, doing content, that sort of thing, much better way to find work than outreach. But if you're going to do outreach, do very specified outreach using the people in your network who are going to be happy to help you. Let them help you. Make them able to help you. So, that does it for that question. Let's move on to the next. Okay, so there's a little bit of, the English here isn't the best. I am, name here, from India. I am 2014 pass out from ECE. So I think the vernacular there is the equivalent of I'm graduating. I've graduated with this degree, and I'm still struggling to get my first job as a Java developer. Please guide and help me if you can. So this was submitted 2.5 years ago. I really hope you found a job, but in case you haven't, or in case, anybody out there is in the same situation, got a degree, a little bit out of school, and still haven't gotten that first job.
I just want to say one word to you. Just one word.
Yes, sir.
Are you listening?
Yes, I am.
Plastics.
As a Java developer, so first things first, I don't know why it has to be specifically a Java developer. Like maybe that was the language you used during your undergrad program. But like honestly, when you're new to the workforce as an entry-level programmer, I wouldn't narrow your scope of job search in any way. So if somebody's willing to give you a job writing Ruby on Rails, go take it. So that's the first bit of advice I would give you. I guess next up is get yourself out there. So if all you've got to your credit is a degree or, a boot camp or something, same deal, that can be tough because it's the chicken and egg thing where when hiring entry level or when hiring developers, everybody wants experience, but how do you get experience if you are entry level? So you can manufacture experience in some ways. I would definitely suggest going out, maybe contributing to open source while you're looking for a job. You might make some contacts that way and get some good leads, but you'll also get your name out there as somebody that's contributing. You're kind of creating a bit of social proof for yourself as a developer. Another good strategy there is to start building a thing and then maybe put up a website for it and say, hey, I'm building this utility. It's free, it's open source, here's how to use it. So if you demonstrate that you can actually build something and beyond that, like create some documentation around it and help users, that starts to speak to you being a pretty well-rounded person. So those are, I think, the easiest pieces of advice I'll give you here. Broaden the search, and then manufacture some kind of social proof. Even if it isn't somebody paying you, it can go a long way to start contributing to open source and to start building a website, chronicling your experiences, and having a thing that you've built and you offer up to other people, because that's pretty much what software engineering is. So go out and get that experience. All right, I think we've got time for one more. This is kind of an interesting premise. This is what I titled the card, how to use JavaScript for something that needs to last a long time. So this says, the trend in front-end web development appears to be moving towards the usage of JavaScript. Previous web front-ends tended to have some server-side dynamic page, such as ASPX or JSP, C# and Java, for those of you who may not know. And the page was sprinkled with some JavaScript. So yes, this was true a bunch of years ago, that you would have kind of the way that front-end development worked was that you had this very server-side oriented kind of paradigm that was like a mix of markup and code, and then the JavaScript you just kind of dropped in there a little bit. I'm thinking back to the height of my web development days and using JSP, which is like a decade ago. Anyway, the trend throughout JavaScript's history has been one of constant shifts in approaches and libraries. This history of constant shifts concerns me, since JavaScript is becoming the standard for web front ends. For a front end that must be supported without a major rewrite for at least 5 years and possibly for at least 10 years, is there a path forward for JavaScript front ends other than writing a framework? This is an interesting philosophical question. So as we've evolved from, kind of a more server-side oriented, where you kind of try to keep everything but little dangling bits of JavaScript in a language like C# or Java, what do we do now when there's all this focus on front-end frameworks and single-page applications, and there's a lot more stuff living in the browser? What impact does that have on long-range maintainability? So basically, if you're building an application, being supported without a major rewrite. So this, I think what I would have to say is JavaScript is so dynamic, and the nature of what you're doing is so dynamic, that this isn't a reasonable ask. You're not going to, think of what happens with JavaScript. So unlike a server-side language, what you do is you take this code, you ball it up in a wad, and you throw it, to whoever's getting it in their browser, at which point the browser opens it up and interprets it and does stuff. This is not a really stable concept in any way. So I think rather than asking yourself how you can write a bunch of JavaScript code and do nothing with it for 5 or 10 years, if you're living in your user's browser, I think you just have to accept that that's a constant evolution and a constant state of maintenance in order to do that. Like, it's just, I'm trying to think of a good analog to this, but this is a source of constant change, almost as if you were developing even, like, say, a desktop app, but the users needed it to constantly change because, I don't know, hardware updates came out, or they just had a lot of different requirements. You also wouldn't say, like, how can I make this stable for the next 5 or 10 years? Sort of the environment and the nature of this piece of software dictates that it's not going to be stable. So I don't know that I would create any kind of framework. I would just maybe accept the reality that if you're going to be doing a lot of stuff in, disparate browsers out there with all of your users, that probably more development than you're used to is going to be focused on this sort of churn and feature maintenance and stuff. It's my philosophical take anyway. I do not do a lot of app dev these days, and mercifully I don't tend to do a lot of production support or whatever, so take that as you will. That's it, I think. We're about at the time. This is a good length for a video. I think I will save the next one for next time, where somebody asked me about this concept of treating all of your code like an API. So tune in for the next reader question roundup when I do it if you want to see more information about that. So that's all I've got. I hope these are fun to watch. It's honestly a lot of fun to record. I'm having a good time. If you like this, I would love a like. Or if you dislike it, you can give it a dislike, whatever you feel like. So if you want to see more content like this, you can give me a subscribe down below. Hit that bell if you want to be notified when the content comes out. I would definitely appreciate any and all forms of engagement. And beyond that, thank you for watching, and stay tuned for next time.